we're going to give you an update now in Massachusetts, where a mistrial was declared last week for Karen Reed. Man, this is why I love the law. It's the kind of case you never would have anticipated would have the twists, the turns, and the lunacy that occurred, but that is exactly what happened in this case. You just never know. Her defense team claims that their client, who was accused of killing her boyfriend with her SUV, was framed by law enforcement and parties with close ties to the case. One of the lead investigators, Trooper Michael Proctor, was relieved from his duties after the mistrial was declared. In the latest, the defense is fighting a retrial, citing, we were talking about this before in the other part of the case, this very important principle of double jeopardy, after a few jurors indicated after the mistrial that they unanimously had decided that Karen Reed was not guilty of the murder charge. Ladies, let's talk about this. Now, if I understand, Robin, this scenario, what happened is that the judge on the murder charge had guilty on the verdict sheet, but not guilty, if I'm understanding this. And the jurors are now going to the defense attorneys and saying, we unanimously believed it was a not guilty. Can she be retried for this? Or, like, I've never experienced anything like this. Should there be a hearing? Should the jurors be voir dired? Is it that the verdict sheet's really not evidence of anything? I mean, what should a judge do when a jury, if they had the right question before them, which had been argued, may I add, prior to the jury verdict sheet going in, the judge wouldn't allow it. Should she be retried for that charge?
I think that this is nuts. It seems very bonkers to me that the jurors are reaching out to the defense attorneys with these unsolicited comments about their opining back in the jury deliberations. It's strange to me that they got the instructions wrong. Arguably, I think that retrying this case is going to be a very, very hard argument for the prosecution to make based on all of these mishaps. That being said, if she is their only possible suspect in this matter, I'm not sure that this would dissuade them from attempting to get it right and getting a new jury in there.
Yeah, Krista, let's really go into some deep, nuanced trial tactical law here. This case to me was a disaster for prosecutors, okay? Now, if I've been in a situation, so I understand the sentiment, where I have a very difficult case to try, but I believe the person did it, and I'd rather lose the case. Here's the principle. I'd rather lose the case than to give it away. Okay, I understand, but I genuinely believe the person did it. There was so much horrible investigation, sloppy investigation. The main detective got fired after the mistrial in the case. But let's assume prosecutors have the ego where they just can't let it go. Let's just assume that they can't let it go. I'm asking you this question. I would have to be saying as a prosecutor, even if the judge allows me to retry this murder charge, now that there's this issue with the jurors saying that they would have voted not guilty, do I want to still file the murder charge, or do I dismiss it and go for the lesser charges? Because if there's a conviction on the murder charge, or if the murder charge is there and the appellate, and there's a conviction, right? So if the murder charge is still there at the next trial and there's a conviction, I know there's going to be an argument that that charge being in the case led to a compromised verdict on a conviction for something less. Am I making sense?
You are making sense. And I mean, I think that I think that most of us thought that this case was overcharged to begin with, and that second degree should have never been there to begin with, right? So, that was always going to be problematic. But I think, when you have this lingering out there that there was, this not guilty decision reached, and, how the judge handles this, is, I think, critical at this point, because if there is a retrial and that second degree charge is still there, then it definitely is problematic on appeal. Because then you have the issue of double jeopardy arises. Was there already a verdict on this issue of not guilty?
Yeah, and let me just interrupt there. It's not, that's true, but also we all know that sometimes there's lesser included offenses, and the jury, the argument the defense is going to make on appeal was that she was, let's say, not convicted of murder, but let's say manslaughter, because the jury compromised. That's always an issue, and if that murder charge had not remained, that second degree charge, they would not have compromised. So I think it puts the prosecution, and I agree with you completely, if you overreached on that second-degree murder charge, and now you have this issue with these jurors, if you're going to retry it, get rid of that murder charge so you don't win the battle and lose the war. But in the other, we'll see what they do. But John O'Keefe's brother, Paul, spoke out after the mistrial was declared. Let's hear some of what he had to say with regards to how that all went down.
Did you, prior to jury deliberations, ever think a mistrial was even possible?
I kept everything was on the table, I guess, but obviously hoping and confident that we were going to get the conviction that we were looking for. So as far as a mistrial, yes, it's something we didn't want, obviously, but, you know, it's just a bump in the road, and like I said, we'll do it again. We'll do it as many times as we have to.
Okay, let's hear a little bit more about what he had to say about what happened on that fatal night.
Do you feel comfortable telling me, just from all that you've learned over the last 2.5 years, like what you think happened that night?
Oh, we know what happened. We know that Johnny and Karen were arguing. It was kind of towards the end of their relationship. Things weren't well. You know, they were drinking and arguing and fighting, and you know, in an intoxicated state of rage and jealousy, she just decided that she was going to do something about it.
Wow, okay, Robin, you intoxicated stage of rage and jealousy. If we didn't have that, most of us probably wouldn't even have a job. That displays so many cases that we handle, especially in the murder context. And while you can understand, you know, it's really fascinating to me as a trial lawyer that even with lawyers, but with families certainly, depending on where you sit is where you stand. There are some that would be passionately that, I mean, a lot of lawyers got turned around in this case. They thought Karen Reed was absolutely guilty. They listened to the evidence and like, oh my, not as advertised. And that there are others that clearly believe that she had something to do with it. So I can understand the sentiments. What are your thoughts though? I mean, sometimes prosecutors set expectations that are a little unrealistic. And after what we saw, I think we need to temper our expectations in the next trial as to her guilt.
Yeah, it's interesting that the victim's brother was so clearly and confident that this was 100% going to be a conviction. I don't think that that was the sentiment of the public. I think that there was a lot of debate around this case. This case got a lot of attention because it was such a mixed bag of information. A lot of the witnesses says that they weren't arguing, that their relationship wasn't troubled, that they were planning a vacation coming up. But it's interesting that the family of the victim's family thinks it was very clearly a jealous rage gone wrong, which I don't know if that played out in all the evidence that we heard.
Yeah, I mean, it's not particular to this particular case, but it always has fascinated me. One of the great things about being a trial lawyer is you can really get to the front row of human nature and see how good people can so passionately listen to the same evidence and have such different viewpoints about what that evidence means. It really is quite extraordinary. Anyway, let's listen to a little bit more about what the brother had to say.
My older brother, so, I mean, generous, loyal, sometimes a pain in the ass to me. I'm sorry, pain in the butt to me.
You can say pain in the ass.
You know, just because he was my older brother, but he just was there if you needed him. He took care of the people that he loved. Good-hearted guy who didn't deserve any of this.
Yeah, and you know, this is really, it's so sad all the way around, of course. And you know what, we're about to show you a clip right now about another human emotion and dynamic that's also always, I've heard in the homicide cases that I've handled. Let's listen to a little bit more about how he believes his brother has been forgotten.
Doesn't it feel sometimes like your brother's forgotten in all of this?
Absolutely, all the time. It's turned into the Karen Reed show. You know, she walks through a crowd that cheers her on. She goes out in public, takes pictures, signs autographs. She's just living her life like nothing's ever happened. And meanwhile, my brother's been gone for almost 2.5 years.
Yeah, Krista, I cannot tell you how many cases I've handled as a prosecutor, and probably virtually all of them. They're usually very high-profile cases, a lot of media attention. The defendant has lots of rights, and then to the victims' families, we're always talking about the defendant's rights, the proof beyond a reasonable doubt, to presumption of innocence, that they don't have to testify against themselves. And thank God for the victim witness advocates for the prosecutor's office that sit with the families and talk them off the ledge, because it can appear that the victim has been forgotten in all this and it's all about the defendant. What are your thoughts about your experiences in the courtroom with respect to how this brother feels his brother is being treated?
Well, I've really struggled with how this plays out for the O'Keefe family. Having lost, a daughter, a son-in-law, and then now, then John, and then this is the Karen Reed show now, isn't it? And, having, experience I actually have experience from the victim standpoint on this. We lost my aunt, and her, with that, you oftentimes get caught up in what the police are telling you and what the DA is telling you. And now, with victims Bill of Rights in almost every state now, they give you a lot more information than they used to, and so you're almost drinking the Kool-Aid and believing whatever they tell you. So if they have it wrong, you have it wrong too, but you don't know that. Because you're part of that family then, that's getting that information from that biased lens. And so I think that is unfortunate here. And I don't think that there's anything really to get mad at Paul about. I think that he has the right anger, and it's just misdirected right now because this prosecution was botched.
Yeah, Robin, that is such a prescient and important point to make. And I can think of one case in particular as a defense lawyer that I have, and I've on a number of cases to a lesser degree, where I was upset with the prosecutors because they sat down with that family, and I sat down with many families. You have to be real. You have to tell them maybe information they don't like. You may have to tell them about the weaknesses of your case, but instead it was all about how strong their case was, and it was falling apart. It was clear that their assessment, I'm not saying it was nefarious, whatever it was, but they never had the courage to go back to the family to say, look, we made a mistake. And so understandably, the family is seeing the case fall apart in the courtroom. Motions are happening. The case ultimately, I remember them screaming at us as we were leaving the courtroom as the defense lawyers. And I was like, I understand the anger and the emotion. And I turned to the prosecutor afterwards. I said, you created all this, and you created the monster in the beginning, and you refused to have the courage to tell them the truth after you realized how you initially assessed this case was wrong. Tell me about any experiences you've had that way.
Yeah, I completely agree. Your situation, I think, dovetails nicely with what we're probably seeing here. I have similarly seen situations like this where the prosecution, the police, the entire team presents a story that there is only one person who could have possibly done this. We have them. They are sitting there, and it builds up this energy in the family that this indeed is the only person that this could possibly be, and we're going to get a conviction. And obviously in this case, we saw this play out that, that wasn't true. I'm not sure that the prosecution owned all the mistakes that their side made leading up to the jury's deliberation in this case, which many would argue was inevitable based on all the errors and mishaps that happened.
All right.